Welcome to the Warships Podcast with your host, Kellorn, Venacera, and Arun.
Hello and welcome to episode 128 of the Warships Podcast. I'm your host, Kellorn, and Arun and I welcome Venacera back this week. And as well, we're being joined by Strangers123 as we're going to talk a little bit about a new season of Clan Battles that's just kicked off. Welcome back to the show, Venacera and Strangers.
Hello.
Yes, good to be back as always.
Awesome. Before we get going, I want to remind people that I will be streaming tonight, April 19th from 9 p.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern U.S. time, 8 to 9 Central time, with Femininely from Wargaming North America headquarters on the official World of Warships stream on Twitch. So it is part of the Twitch Bits campaign that Ashley was so kind to describe last week. So guys, don't forget to tune in tonight for that entire stream and to see me and Femininely talk a little bit at the to close off the stream at the end. So, strangers, did anything surprise you about last season of Clan Battles, that it kind of how it wrapped up? You know, we had kind of gotten into like this meta of quite a few Henrys and things like that. That the last season was over the winter holidays, and we don't seem to see much difference in terms of compositions and tactics this season so far from that.
Well, not really. We've seen, for the most part, we see a pretty big Russian invasion on the EU server, and they have a tendency to bring 3, even 4 on Rees and just do their good old, for those that know the CSGO meme, Suka Bliat Rush B tactics, but they do their rush tactics, and they're very aggressive with it. But other than that, the map pool is pretty much the same. The archetypes of the maps haven't changed, so if your strategy worked last season, I don't really see much of a reason that it shouldn't work at least decently this season. There are some small changes to Sea of Fortune, Warriors Pass spawns, and Mountain Range returning, but Mountain Range is reasonably similar to Land of Fire in its own ways with the island positionings and such.
Do the rush and tactics work?
Well, that's probably one of the reasons it works on EU, is that EU is probably known to be one of the more passive competitive servers, definitely set by the old metas of Tier 8. But with it being so passive, you can definitely get away with some sneaky aggressive plays if you don't have proper scouting and you get caught off.
So my clan has been playing a little bit on the EU server on the weekends, Strangers, and it's really interesting to me that we haven't seen... I don't think we've repeated to play it against the same team at all. And that has made for, I don't want to say it's made it easier, but you're not fighting the same difficult clans over and over again because of the fact that you're playing against a different server and that server has a higher population. Is the fact that we are able to do different server times making a difference in how Clan Battles is playing out in itself without regards to tactics?
It definitely makes it different because each server has their different metas. At least I definitely feel so. The Russians are more aggressive. We've seen aggressive Henri, Moskva, Stalin moves. EU is very passive. I haven't been on NA for a while, and I haven't ever played Asia at all in any reasonable competitive. So I'm not really certain what goes on there. But the metas are different, which means that people do different things, and they're used to fighting different things as well. So that definitely throws things off, and I honestly quite enjoy it.
No, we've definitely been having quite a good time ourselves. But I guess I feel like this is just a repeat of last season. And I don't feel like that is good for the game. Do you disagree with me? Do you think that having a season that is relatively similar to the last one is okay?
That really depends on what you think of it, though, at the moment. With carrier rework being, let's just say, a rather big work in progress, I don't see there really being much different you could do. You could go with different map archetypes, and that would be about the biggest changes you can make, unless you want to introduce different changes to the lineup rules, say 2 battleships, or 8v8 or 9v8, or even compressing more to 5v5. Unless you do some drastic changes such as that, you're pretty much stuck with the old thing, and that's in a way fine because it doesn't. You don't need to change a competitive drastically every single season. I'd rather keep it in small increments so that way teams that are not top level, they can pick up, they can learn it, and they can keep going with something that they understand and know without having it suddenly flipped upside down every single season.
So speaking of changes, one of the topics that keeps getting floated around, sometimes seriously, sometimes derisively, is Borgonia. And is the oversized Alsace worth it in clan battles?
Depends on what you want. It really is down to what you pick. And probably the biggest issue here, in a similar way to Stalingrad, is not really how the ship is balanced. I think both of these ships are in and of themselves fine. It's what class they are. The Bourgogne is considered a battleship, which it really isn't. It's squishy, easily killed, just like a Republique, just like the Conqueror. You definitely get battleship levels of firepower, but you're much easier to kill, so you lose a ship that can tank compared to, say, picking a Montana or a Yamato. Same goes for the Stalingrad. It's classed as a cruiser, so you can bring a couple more of them. Same goes for Moskva as well. You can bring more of them, so you still gain this additional tankiness without having to make the selection, the choice of saying, this is going to be my only one battleship because I can only bring one. So if you want a free-floating, roaming cruiser cruncher that is capable of fighting off most things decently, Bourgogne's not a bad pick, but you need somebody that really knows how to manage their HP to be able to make good use out of it, or else you're just going to find yourself becoming a target practice for the enemy and they kill you, and that's not good.
I guess if the other team is bringing something like a Montana or a Yamato, is Borgonia able to, is the rest of the team able to make up for the fact that Borgonia can't take that?
That depends on the rest of your composition. If you have, bring a couple of Stalingrads, you can fight off battleships quite effectively at long range. If you bring a couple of Henris along with that, you have a lot of firepower you can push out. So it depends on what you want out of your lineup.
So you talk about lineups. What are the most common lineups that you're seeing that are being successful this season?
We're almost always seeing double Henri. Most lineups run with a single destroyer. There's a lot of maps where the caps can be, rather easily contested at the start with a destroyer if you're willing to go for it. Maps like Islands of Ice, the off cap, you can pretty much almost always instantly get to the island and you'll be reasonably safe inside of A. Warrior's Path is difficult. Mountain range is a bit more difficult. There are some positions you can risk, but that depends on enemy compositions. Land of Fire is probably the most difficult map to get an early cap contest. If you get south, you have an area you can reasonably contest. If you get north, you're kind of stuffed because you don't have an island that you can quickly hide behind with a 6-second radar delay to, for the most part, radar cruisers don't shoot the cap. They're behind an island. So the 6-second delay really makes it you can quickly get out. But against zero destroyer lineups, maps like Sea of Fortune, you can also make early contests and poke around the caps. But for the most part, we've been seeing one destroyer. TWA nicked my 3-destroyer lineup from that we started off with last season. It was double Harugumo and Yueyang. They ran triple Harugumo. I think they were just memeing around, but that also can work. But you really need to know people that know what they're doing to get away with that. But for the most part, double Henris are given. 2 radar cruisers is common, and common battleships for Yamato. I've seen some Montanas. Yamatos and Republiques because it's 1 battleships to 6 cruisers or destroyers. Usually it's 5 cruisers. So Yamato Lolpen, Republique Lolpen is a very valuable asset there. So other than that, that's the most common lineups we're seeing on EU server.
So we talked a little bit about changes. We have the Russian battleships that are in the pipeline here. From what you've seen and heard about Kreml and Slava, are either of those going to be an option in your mind for a battleship to anchor in clan battles?
As an anchor, probably not. The ships are not built for being anchoring, and if I remember correctly, they still had 50 mil deck armor, so Henris will still chew through them just like a Kurfürst. And
they're actually getting upgraded. One of the things we're going to talk about today is they're getting 60 mil of deck armor.
Only on the rear section, though, I believe, wasn't it?
No, it's the deck armor and the rear side armor.
Ooh, okay. If it's upgraded to 60, then that changes things quite a bit. So you're then pretty much going to be down to burning it, which with the damage control party system would be quite difficult. In that case, you're really getting survivability and mobility at the cost of reliable long-range firepower. But if you're planning on running an aggressive setup, taking advantage of its better close-range firepower, and now they're also changing the penetration so you don't overpen as much, you can't get away as much with perfectly angling, also known as sailing flat broadside, against it. With that, Of course, it's still a work in progress, it's not released yet, but with that, I definitely think there is a possibility it could find some space in the lineup for aggressive use. Get it in, get it stuck in, much like Kurfürst on some of the closer-in maps. Get in there, deal the damage. You might lose the ship, but if you get a couple of kills for it, it's more than worth it.
So back when we had Azuma at tier 10, we talked a little bit about whether on the podcast about whether or not it would be a useful clan battleship. Now, we all know Azuma was nerfed a little bit and stuck in at tier 9, but we are getting Yoshino that's in the testing process. We actually haven't seen it as CCs yet, but it's going to have at least 2 options for torpedoes, one of which is going to be 12, it looks like 12 kilometers, and the other is going to be 20 kilometer torps. Considering the fact that we know that Yoshino is not going to have a 30 mil bow section, or even even a 27 mil, it looks like it's probably going to be 25. Is it worth even considering, strangers?
So that's a bit too early to say. I do think that if you get a large cruiser that has good concealment, has torpedoes that you can spam. By the way, 20 kilometers of torpedoes, in my opinion, are silly and really shouldn't be a thing at all.
I'm not. We can. Aaron's going to disagree with us on that one in a minute, but I completely agree. But I do think that the 12s are going to be useful.
I think both have their use in their own way. The 20s, because you're not going to have the concealment of a Shima, because you're not a Shima. There might be the possibility of trying to stagger them with another destroyer and just spam them, and in general just make life difficult for people. But if you get a reasonably tanky or tanky enough ship with decent enough camo and good enough firepower, again, the majority of your targets are going to be cruisers with probably the same amount of battleships as destroyers on average. So, having a cruiser cruncher is a good thing, and having reliable, accurate guns, which is what Wargaming seems to want to do with both Azunyan and Yoshino. They don't mind the names, but with that, I think there could potentially be a use for one of them, but that depends on how much utility you wish to sacrifice. You're most likely going to be looking at a Henri being traded for one of the for Yoshino.
I mean, and that's kind of what I figured too, is that it plays the most like the way we use Henris in the lineup, with the advantage of rate of fire probably going to the Henri because of the booster, and the concealment going to Yoshino. So that's an argument that I keep having with people, is that I think that concealment is probably worth it, but that's something that's been up in the air quite a bit.
I mean, what will the concealment of both these ships be, and what will the concealment through smoke be? The Henri is going to have the smoke firing advantage due to having noticeably smaller guns. But as for the base concealment, these ships, I don't think there's going to be a huge difference between them. Henri's faster than the Azuma and Yoshino, so, just down to the nature of the baguette boost. But if you're, assume a 1 versus 1 fight, the Henri will be able to sure, it gets spotted a couple hundred meters earlier, but if you're chasing, you'll still be able to catch up to the Yoshino before she actually manages to get the engines going to get out and kite you properly. So you will still be facing an engagement in such a situation, instead of, say, Zhao versus Henri. The Zhao, will spot the Henri 3 kilometers before the Zhao gets spotted and has a bit of time to start picking up speed and, kiting you away before picking a fight.
I know people are going to try it. I'm interested to see how it goes. Honestly, I've been saving my steel to buy Yoshino because I don't really find Burgundy to be that interesting. So I also like just the playstyle of the IJN cruisers more anyway. That said, there's a possibility that next season of Clan Battles will see the reworked carriers for the first time. So based on what you see of the carriers so far, and maybe think about their iteration over the next couple of months before the next Clan Battle season, what would you expect from carriers to be from the carrier inclusion? What do you expect that to influence Clan Battles, if it comes to pass at all? Do you think that they're going to be required for every team? And 2, does the skill difference between the 2 carrier players matter as much if they are not directly fighting each other for air control?
Well, first of all, carriers in such a precarious state that it's really too hard to predict what's going to happen with them in the future. But if we go by it not changing too much from what we have right now, I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of the tactically adhesively glued together stuck groups of ships, also known as a blob. Just down to AA. You're going to see more AA ships and such. So it really the question of carriers has almost always in competitive, been a question of how many carriers to how many surface ships, the carrier to everything else ratio. In 9 versus 9 with single carrier, it's 1 carrier to 8 surface ships. Here, it's going to be 1 carrier to 6 surface ships. And if you then have a battleship on top of a carrier, so if they decide to let you have a battleship, that's going to be a very firepower-centric lineup. And it probably would just result in people blobbing up. To be completely honest, if they comes out in a similar situation as it is right now, I would probably just go 1 gearing or garage revive, 5 Henrys in a carrier, and just say, hi, I'm going to blob into your face, smoke up, and then shoot you with a carrier spotting. So that's my biggest fear, that the meta will just become really boring and you lose tactical nuances to the constant spotting and the attacks that are going to be going on, which force you to group up so you can actually defend yourself and stop the carrier from just dealing free damage. So that's my biggest fear.
So nothing changes compared to right now?
Compared to right now, no, nothing really changes. At least, if you're comparing to randoms. But compared to at least, CV-free clan battles and old KOTS, where a single ship could hard counter a carrier and stop it from being spotted. Heck, even a ZOW, fully AA spec or heavily AA spec, you didn't want to fly a carrier into that. You're going to lose a lot of planes, but that's no longer a problem anymore. The ZOW can't defend itself. Even a Minotaur cannot prevent itself from being struck. It's going to take damage from a carrier eventually. Whereas in the old system, you could almost completely negate a carrier single-handedly as an AA spec Wusterminne or Des Moines.
What about you from your perspective, Aaron? I know you play quite a bit more carriers than most of the rest of us. Do you think that they're going to be something that's required for clan battles?
Well, if they don't change carriers, yes, absolutely. There is no question about it, because they're... what would be a nice way to put it? They might be slightly too powerful. A teeny tiny bit, maybe.
And do you how much of that has to do with the Midway dive bomber bug that we have right now?
Wait,
absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing at all. Because the problem is how much damage the Midway does in terms of how she performs on her own. But Strangers earlier mentioned the spotting. The spotting is the real problem, because it means that you can't go elsewhere other than where your team is as a destroyer or anything else, because you'll simply be lit up the entire time. You go close to anything the enemy has, you'll be shot at. And the spotting I don't know, I think the spotting is the biggest issue. I think if the CV damage output would have to rival spotting, we would probably have to double or triple the CV damage, where the CV can just basically win the game on their own or something, because that spotting is crazy good.
What about my other question for both you, Aaron, and you, Strangers? One of the big things about carriers in competitive modes previously was that the battle between the two carrier players mattered a great deal. If one carrier player was significantly more skilled than the other, they could shut down the other player. Is that true anymore?
Absolutely. I still think it's going to be there. If you stop missing attacks, the few attacks you're going to get through. If you misjudge or you fly too much into flak, there's still the individual level of skill there. And if there is a significant enough difference in the skill, one carrier is going to find himself getting more damage in than the other, and damage in such a situation is going to be the absolute key. If you fail to get the damage in, you fail to get the spawning in, then the other team's just going to start leveraging the advantage and make it even bigger. Compared to the old style carriers, the skill gap was much larger. Just take a win rate as an arbitrary number. Take a 80% win rate player versus a 75% win rate player. You could already be seeing differences there. Obviously it's much more complex than just win rate, but just using that to give an indication of the small changes. But now take an 80% win rate versus a 75% win rate player, and you probably wouldn't see too much of a difference there.
I think Strangers basically nailed it. There is going to be a skill gap, but the skill gap it's not going to be a necessarily deciding factor. It won't be, hey, your CV is better, you just win. There's nothing the enemy team can do about it. Or at least it won't be, hey, we have the stronger carrier player, we can always win if we just get to a later stage in the game, because your carrier is going to deplane the other carrier, and then, you end up getting control of the map. I think this isn't a thing anymore, and this is going to be, I think, useful. It, in my opinion, allows wargaming to try to balance the thing in a way where clan battles could have a CV, because as Stranger said, there isn't going to be as much of a gap between an excellent CV player and a great CV player. So the 80 versus 75%. And this means that more, people could do the CV thing. Except, of course, Strangers also mentioned the CV to other ships ratio, which unfortunately is something that clan battles is going to suffer from until CVs end up not bringing more to the table than other ships do.
To be honest, though, the discussion of the amount of CVs to the surface ships in competitive has generally never really been there. It's only for a 12v12 where we actually tried 2 CV, and that's 1 CV to 5 surface ships as a ratio there. And that was probably not very interesting for the people playing surface ships. I was playing the carrier, thankfully, back then. But the only real thing that I think Wargaming can balance around here is the total amount of players. And if you're going to introduce CVs in anything resembling the state currently, you might have to consider bumping it up to 8 versus 8. And on top of that, make the 1 battleship rule, consider making it a 1 capital rule. So you can choose, do you want a carrier or do you want a battleship? Still think carriers are probably going to be more useful in the long run, but at least with 8 ships, you get more space to bring AA and utility without sacrificing your core fleet combatants, your Henris, your Moskvas, your Stalingrads, and even Zaus and Worshters if you're using those. But at least you get some more space for utility, a Minotaur, which in the current meta really is just utility because Stalingrad, Moskva, and Henris kind of hard counter Minotaurs.
Strangers, what would you say to people who dislike playing cruises such as Moskva's, Henris, etc.?
What do you mean?
Well, some people prefer playing battleships, some people prefer playing destroyers, and some people really dislike playing those kinds of cruisers. You can understand how current clan battle meta might not be most conducive to their play. What would you say to them?
Write an angry letter or throw it in the bin because Wargaming is never going to read it. But in all seriousness, you're kind of just going to have to find yourself in it. Until Wargaming changed the balance and the way the balancing works, that's kind of just the way it is. And I don't see really there being much you can do about it. Either you kind of just have to adapt, or you have to find yourself a clan where you're the BB player and you get to play.
Well, maybe we just need to allow 6 battleships, right?
That used to be a thing back when competitive was starting out. It was I think it was 10v10 tier 6, and people just ran 6 Fusos.
Well, I do want to talk about some other things today. We do have something pretty unique to talk about this week, and that's the Torpedo Beat mode released for space battles. So with ships that have automatic primaries, enhanced maneuverability and speed, and torpedo armament, that's the only thing you can control, this mode is unlike anything official we've ever seen before, though it does bear some resemblance to the torpedo jousting tournaments that some people were putting on for a while. Are things like this good for the game, in you guys' opinion, or do they distract from what people should be focusing on to get better at the core game?
I think it absolutely is a very important skill that you're training in such a game mode. You're training your ability to read obvious, for the most part, they're going to be obvious torpedoes, and being able to read, with now reduced time, but also reduced penalties, you take a bit less damage from them. But, the rapid amount of torpedoes you're throwing, it helps you learn how to evade torpedoes, and I think that is an incredibly important core skill, especially for DD players in the game.
Yeah, completely agree. 100%.
I just think we need custom games, and I think we needed them years ago. So this could have been a custom game a really long time ago. And so we could have other custom games too, where people can learn to play. They can pick one aspect of the game and then practice at it through a custom game, because this is kind of what, in my opinion, this torpedo mode is.
Are you guys having fun with it? I've played a couple of games, but and it seems like it's fun for a little while, but it gets a little grating on me after a while, because you talked a little bit about that there people are practicing skills, Strangers, but for me the feeling for when you launch torpedoes at another destroyer is largely dependent on that the speed and the maneuverability of that destroyer, and it just feels like you're having to lead too much and do too much random just torping and just kind of hope, or you close to knife range and both die.
Well, I mean, I've been a DD main in competitive for quite a long time, even though you've probably seen me play BBs in competitive much more, but there is a lot of nuances in trying to guess what an opponent is doing, and same goes for what probably the biggest one is guessing what he is guessing of you. And it really is this game of psychology that I think is actually quite interesting, because this was a ranked game I'm going to mention here, but I was playing against this sheep, another one of the high-level EU destroyer mains, and it was a ranked game. We basically spent the entire game trying to torp each other off RPF with 2 Shimas. So, eventually he just sent his Vadar Minotaur to come deal with me. I dealt with him myself, but that's kind of what it is. And for us, though, probably the reason we don't think it's so interesting, unless you're a DD main, is just we know how to dodge torpedoes. We can see it when somebody is making an obvious torpedo launch attack against you, and we can predict it. So for us, there's nothing really special to it. It really just is a condensed aspect of the game that, in general, probably doesn't have too good longevity. But I think that for a more casual player who does not feel comfortable with torpedoes, does not feel comfortable with predicting destroyer movements, and does not feel comfortable knowing when torpedoes are coming at them, this definitely could be a useful mode, while still giving them some cool, fun things to play with, and also, being, in a way, educational, a practice mode for them to learn to get better at dodging torpedoes.
What is fun, anyway?
Something that doesn't exist in this game, Kappa.
Vanessa, what about you? We haven't heard from you yet today. What do you think of this torpedo jousting mode in the space battles?
No, any added mode to kind of break up the monotony of random battles, because some of us have, been doing random battles for quite a while now, and also, some of us can't necessarily do clan battles. So any new modes like this can be a lot of fun and just really break up the monotony.
Also, I'd like to add that I pitched a torpedo jousting mode to them when we were at St. Petersburg, to many people, but unfortunately I was told no back then. However, it seems maybe I had some success after all.
By torpedo joust, I usually think of the V-25 stuff that have those weird forward torpedo launchers. This is a little bit different from that, but I do agree that they did take some of our ideas that we talked about at the summit last year, Aaron. Today, we woke up in the North America region to a new dev blog post, which covers a number of topics in one big post rather than breaking them up. So we will be breaking them up. And first up, we're going to talk about the further changes to the Tier 8 plus Soviet battleships. We talked a little bit about this a minute ago, but it should be noted that these changes are undergoing testing and are not final. First up, Kreml is getting her deck armor and stern belt armor increased from 50 millimeters to 60 millimeters. Now, what I don't know, strangers, is if that's the entire deck is going to be 60 millimeters or just the central deck. So we'll have to, that's kind of up in the air yet. And then the AP shell penetration has been lowered, as strangers also mentioned. Her torpedo protection has been increased from 29% to 46%. The option to include the gunfire control system upgrade has been removed, which is the plus 16% range upgrade that most people were taking. And then the main gun turret HP values have been increased, making it harder to fully destroy the turrets. Similarly, the Sovietsky Soyuz has been modified nearly identically to Kreml, and the Tier 8 Vladivostok has just had her AP penetration values lowered. Conversely, Slava has been changed to emphasize a longer range role, lowering her deck armor to 32 millimeters, increasing her Sigma from 1.7 to 1.9, increasing the base repair party consumables, and giving the ship a standard damage control party rather than the charge-based one that is on the other Soviet battleships. Now, this certainly gives a significant differentiation between Kreml and Slava at Tier 10, which is important, I think, to prevent another Conqueror situation where one set of guns never gets used. But on the other hand, do you guys think that these changes to the mainline ships emphasize the brawler role, or do you think that the changes are hindering what they're trying to do with these Soviet battleships?
Ooh. I mean, the point of the Soviet battleship is supposed to be able to get in close, but if you only, quote-unquote, only had the 50 millimeters of armor, that means that you do bleed to Henri's, you bleed to Stalingrad HE, 305 HE and above, and in general, it could just mean you take a bit less damage and you're able to get in. Removing the range upgrade is a good thing there, because you kind of hard force people, just like the old Havarosk, to stop people from just trying to sit at long range poking holes in you. And with the reduction of the penetration, because the Russian ships have this penetration deal that one of their niches is that they have high velocity, flat trajectory, high pen guns. But if you want people to get close, like Wargaming rightly mentioned, penetration plays a key role in arming times, because sure, you hit the main belt of any cruiser in the game, at that tier, your shell is guaranteed to arm. It's too thick. But if it has too high velocity and too much penetration, the penetration here matters because of the kinetic energy. It's more kinetic energy that needs to be bled to slow the shell down to a point where even the 0.33 arming time. Let's do the math. If your shell is 1,000 meters per second at that range, the 0.33 or a third of a second's arming time is still 300 meters, which is still the length of your ship before it goes off. So you need to bleed that speed to not just overpen anything that wants to perfectly angle against you. P.S. That's flat broadside. So I think the changes are good. Sorry.
No, that's fine. I have concerns though, because if they're really getting a 60 mil deck, even if it's just the center section of the ship, the amount of HE that you're just straight immune to is really concerning, because battleships, we've complained about the fire chance and stuff like that for a really long time, but in reality, if you can't do HE alpha damage with cruisers, battleships are insanely tanky. And I worry that this might be too much, especially because we're stepping up the torpedo protection to almost 50% as well.
Well, you can compensate for that by increasing the amount of HP the superstructure gets.
That's true, but it doesn't look like they've done that yet, if that makes sense.
No, but that is an option that they potentially could go for. And I prefer these kind of soft balancing ideals over hard stat balancing, and just saying, you know what, you're just going to hard balancing, take less damage. Make it so that you can take more damage for a longer period of time at least, and increase the total hull section HP. And the other thing they can do instead, currently all tier 10 ships have a fixed 50% reduction in fire chance. They could, for example, say, you get this consumable-based damage control party, we're going to reduce your hull-based fire chance by 10% for all of the ships. So you get 45% reduction, or even go ahead and say we're going to make it 40% reduction in fire chance compared to 50. There are things that could be done on the soft balancing level that would help mitigate these kind of issues.
So in principle, you're okay with a 60 millimeter deck?
I mean, Yamato's got 57, Isthmo's got 57. People generally don't seem to complain about them. So in terms of the deck armor, I don't see these ships being too difficult to burn down given sufficient time. The question being their damage output really here being the key thing to keep in mind. Because just like the Yamato, the Russian battleships do actually have citadels that can be punished should you make some angling mistakes.
Doesn't Friedrich der Grosse have like 70?
80 on gun turret sections, 50 on everywhere else.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Wargaming's in kind of a tough designing spot right here, because you have a clear gameplay set that they want these ships to perform, and they very much want to push that role for these ships. They want people who are playing these ships to use them in a very specific way. So they're trying to push that use, or I don't want to say meta, but they want to push that idea on these ships. So how do you do that? Through design and through, coaxing the person, hey, if you want to successfully use this ship, this is how you're going to have to play it, but also balance it to all the other ships in the game.
I think one of the ways wargaming could coax people into doing things is through the achievements, but not the kind we have right now. Like if you look at World of Warships and then compare it to, say, Battlefield, you'll notice that when you get a kill in Battlefield, or any kind of special type where you kill too many people or something along those lines, you get this really big and noticeable animated instance that pops up that says, hey, you did this. Of course, a sound effect plays. In World of Warships, you get the sound effect, but the icon that appears is usually tiny or in the corner or something along those lines, and you're like, yeah, I guess that's cool and all, but it doesn't kind of give the same feedback, I believe. And I think Wargaming could coax people through that, and by I don't know, trying to bias certain ship classes, for example, into certain types of achievements. So, for example, some achievements would be battleship specific, or something along those lines would be a possibility.
You'll still be fighting basic human nature in the design process, though, and they tried that with World of Tanks, trying to get people to to coax them into doing things, and what we ended up as a result, they were corridor maps. And we're seeing quite a few corridor maps. You have a west flank, a mid section, and a east flank or north-south splits, where there are rather defined sections for people to head towards, especially now with the caps. But I do agree, though, that some kind of instant gratification, probably the best, would be showing you XP. And Wargaming is talking about things like tanking damage or battleships and whatnot. You've been blocking damage, and things like smoke XP. To give destroyer players an instant gratification for actually supporting their teammates with smoke when they need it, and to be able to push things like that. Same goes for spotting damage, for radar damage, and for things like that. The question really is, how would you balance this into the game's economy? But I do agree that Wargaming really is quite far behind in implementing these kind of mechanics.
I hear you, and I completely agree that I think we need to release Hotspot back again.
As long as I get my Islands of Ice back, you can have your hotspot back.
Give me old Islands of Ice over Hotspot any day, but still, the old Islands of Ice wouldn't work so well in the current meta due to ships being much less maneuverable than they used to be.
Well, I mean, Hotspot is going to take care of that with the 5 cap zones and the cross spawns. It's going to be no problem. Oh, they'll even take care of the carrier problem, too. 2 birds with 1 stone?
Yeah, but you don't really get to instantly know where the carrier is because you don't see the RTB planes.
Well, we could just have them spawn closer.
You have a 50-50 chance of guessing, so...
Fair enough.
Well, we also had some changes to Georgia, which is getting another round of balancing, which lowers her base range from 21 kilometers to 20 kilometers, increases the secondary base range from 6 kilometers to 7.5 kilometers, as well as boosting the secondary reload, giving the ship an engine boost consumable, allowing the engine boost 1 mod to be mounted, reducing the healing power significantly while it's active, but reducing the repair party reload time. And all this is an attempt to give the ship some kind of identity beyond just a low gun count accurate battleship with big guns. It should be noted that this is just a test balancing, but with that said, I'm not honestly sure that Georgia needs this change or this balancing pass, as the ship, in my opinion, was already a significant amount of fun to play and plays different than the other American battleships that you kind of compare it to.
I don't know. I think they should also add torpedoes to her, defensive fire, radar, maybe a super heal. I don't know. I mean, there's still quite a few things left to give her, I think, and that could make her more fun, I believe.
Don't forget the warp drive, so you can teleport behind someone and then delete them and then just warp back out again while we're there.
You mean Blink Dagger?
Yeah, that's a bit too science fiction-y not science fiction. That's a bit too fantasy-y. At least warp drives, you could say they fit on a ship because spaceships.
Or what is it, the Philadelphia experiment or something?
Oh yeah, maybe we should give her a hydrofoil so she can dodge torpedoes.
I mean, it would fit with the engine boost.
Yeah, I agree with you, Kalorn. I felt the ship, is okay. As it is, it could be released, and I think in its current state is at least balanced and not at all overpowered or necessarily underpowered. Yeah, there are definitely frustrating moments in the ship, and I've tried to put in as many games as I could. I've had some really outstanding games, and I've had some really poor games, and it's just the nature of you have 6 guns. Sometimes, you'll hit with everything, and then sometimes you'll hit with like 1 shell, and given the nature that it's an 18-inch shell, sometimes it will just not perform the way that you hope it would, and other times you'll get like silly bouncing and shell breaking and other just crazy things that are like, wow, but it's, if they release the ship now, I think it would be an okay ship. It wouldn't be outstanding, and it wouldn't necessarily be poor performing. I think it would just be an okay ship.
But isn't that really what we want, though? Isn't there always this goal for the players side, at least, that you want a game that is well balanced and something that is okay, not great, not bad, means that it fits in a balance. And that's what I'm seeing, here that Wargaming is looking at. They're looking for a gimmick, if you want, that you can give to it. They want to make something absolutely stand out. But in my opinion, a lot of the American ships, their standout points, their selling points have always been that they've been jack of all trades. So why not continue with that trend with Georgia? It really is just an Iowa with bigger guns, but a lower single salvo throw weight. So, to compensate for lower throw weight, like Wargaming has done correctly, is to give it accuracy. So you can actually hit stuff and still do, on average and over the long periods of time, the same amount of damage as somebody throwing out more shells. But here, though, why not just give it that accuracy, make it a good cruiser cruncher that can fight off battleships just like Alaska? And this is what I've been saying for Alaska as well. Give it good accuracy, and that's all the ship needs. Make that its standout point, that it is capable of rewarding skillful gameplay by the players play, and not by giving it some weird gimmicks that you try to coax people into using for the ship.
Yeah, I will say, I agree with the jack of all trades. I think, one of the standouts for U.S. battleships, and that's kind of before the proliferation of carriers in the new meta, but, one of the big things with U.S. battleships was always they had really good concealment. And I think that's kind of been negated a little bit with the new meta, if you will. But going to Georgia, I think one of the changes that, I'm glad to see with this is the increase in the secondary range. And I feel this should kind of be across the board with most U.S. battleships. I think as the game has kind of progressed and, you've had some other battleship lines come out that have substantially further secondary ranges, I think if you're supposed to have the USN battleships as a jack of all trades, then should maybe consider bumping it up a kilometer or a kilometer and a half for secondaries across the board for USN battleships.
That's actually the part of this change that makes the least sense to me. Now, I enjoyed seeing it. I think it'll be fun to play with, but Georgia does not play like a close-range battleship by any stretch of the imagination. So I this is one that I just didn't feel like it fit with the rest of the way that the ship was set up.
Here's where I'm going to not necessarily disagree, but just throw a counterpoint, because there are many, many times that you get into battle and you can't necessarily just run away. And Georgia is a great, standoff and just throw shells. If you've got the opportunity, especially with its rate of fire, to just kind of sit in the back and throw shells, you can have a lot of fun. But there are so many times I've come across where you're setting up and the game just evolves and you get into close combat, or destroyers rush you, or there's something that happens and you either need to run, or you've got multiple destroyers around and now you're evading and you're not necessarily worried about taking torpedoes, but you're just on the defensive. And I've had just the secondaries going off on the normal, but with this increased range, I would feel more comfortable when I get into those situations.
I think that the changes make her more interesting. The things you guys mentioned earlier is that you think she is fine. I think she is okay too. But she is a ship I would probably almost never play, because she just doesn't seem very interesting to me. If I wanted to play a ship like this, I could play the Missouri, except she would have radar, and this would make her already more interesting. I just don't think that these kinds of ships are super interesting to play, particularly when they're tier 9, because they so often get into tier 10 games, so you're already playing from a disadvantage, so your jack of all trades is just going to get crushed because of matchmaking. And because of that, I think adding some kind of differences to her makes some sense. However, I feel that maybe having long-range secondaries plus speed boost and all the other stuff she has might be... It doesn't really fit an American battleship, I think.
I mean, let's count the column gimmicks that the ship is going to get. 18-inch guns, Lolpen's cruiser armor at tier 10, goes right through 30. Doesn't go through 32, but only Yamato Musashi gets that, so it's fine. You now get French engine boost, basically. You still keep USN dispersion pattern. You keep decent AA. You have Iowa speed. You've got, on top of the speed boost, so you basically become an Alsace for all intents and purposes. You still have the 38 deck, so you resist light cruiser IFHE spam. And what did I miss? Like, in terms of total capabilities here, you've pretty much got a lot more than any other BB that already exists. It's more than the French. They get speed boost, and the Republic gets lull pen, but speed boost, lull pen, and secondary range with decent fire chance. But here you get 6, 7 capabilities compared to the 4 to 5 that most other average.
It's a premium ship.
I think in fairness,
after all.
I would go ahead, Aaron.
No, it's a premium ship after all, or a reward ship, something like that.
I don't know. I feel like if you're going to keep the jack of all trades, maybe take the engine boost out and go with something that would be more American themed and give it the AA defense. I know it's kind of worthless right now, but I mean, it would make more sense.
To be honest, there's actually something I would like to see, and that is to tie it in with the accuracy of the guns. 2 ways to give it a gimmick consumable that could potentially be interesting. One of them could be, overfire rammers, and you get, say, 15% better reload at the cost of 5% dispersion, or you can make it the opposite. You get a 20% worse reload. Anyone remember the Halloween modes North Carolina with the 0 dispersion consumable? Give it something like that. Give it better accuracy for a salvo or 2 at the cost of reload. So, make it your next salvo gets incredibly accurate, more accurate salvo pattern, which rewards skillful use of your guns, good prediction of enemy maneuvers and good aim, and can punish somebody that is static and can't possibly dodge at the cost of a bit of reload. So you might have to go through, say, a 40-second reload instead of 30. But you get to do more damage with that shot while still keeping your long-term average damage outputs the same.
I think all those are interesting ideas. I don't know that Wargaming is ready to embrace something like that Halloween mode consumable in the main game right now, strangers. I really do feel like they use these special modes as ways to test things, and it's proven true over the years that they test things out in those special modes that don't have a lot of consequence for the main game, and then if it works out, they tweak it a little bit and dump it onto the main server. Now, I don't feel like they felt, based on the fact that they haven't really increased the number of consumables since testing all of those consumables, that's something that they're ready to play with right now.
Perhaps not. But with the way they're buffing accuracy across the board, something like this could be a viable alternative while not making it so that you're just going to hard out say we're going to buff accuracy. Give the player a choice in this case. And here, as consumables, you could either give them 2 choices. You can choose better reload at the cost of accuracy or better accuracy at the cost of reload temporarily.
Yeah, like I said, I'm not saying it was a bad idea. I just don't know that Wargaming, based on what I can tell from the outside, that they're ready to go that route yet.
I mean, they were gimmick consumables for Halloween mode, by all means. But, maybe. I'll keep my hopes up.
So we do have one question of the week, outstanding question of the week to ask to close out the podcast today. And that comes from Urza3142 on the forums. And he asks, you guys mentioned the difficulty of navigating the landscape of the current CV rework debate as CC members. As someone who's inexperienced, sub 1,000 games, and came back from a long break because of the new CV changes, how should I navigate the community waters around the class that got me to try this game? And he specifically means coming back for the CV rework.
I would just upfront start with ignore all of it, form your own opinions, and leave it at that. There's a lot of both controversy, salt, and emotion in with carrier rework as the both as a concept, the design of it, and its implementation and balancing is multiple separate things. But if you don't want to get caught up in this kind of stuff, just don't get caught up with it. Ignore it, leave it be, don't care about it, make your own opinion, and that's the important thing for you right there. But if you want to approach it as something that I think all people should consider, keep it constructive, keep your arguments down to your, by all means use your opinions, but keep personal insults, keep irrelevant notions out of the way, and just talk on a personal level as if you would with some other human being face to face, and keep it civilized. Same tips for any kind of discussions, to be honest.
I think you should just, accept that you're a horrible person for playing CVs. That seems to be what the community thinks. If that's difficult, then, at first, maybe you're paralyzed. That's okay. You can then deny it at first, be frustrated afterwards, pour out some anger at it, then maybe try to see how you could, bargain with people to make them feel better about CVs. But you'll probably find that, it's inevitable. And finally, you probably will just have to accept that you're a terrible person for liking carry play.
I think Arun's onto something here, Vanessa.
Yeah. This is what I always I don't want to always kind of recommend, but if you're seeing a lot of flack, just disable the chat, just ignore it. Just play the game. Play the game, play a lot of matches, maybe play a lot of matches in other ships and other classes, and just kind of form your opinion based on that. If you play a bit of everything in the game, then you can kind of get an overall perspective on how the game is balanced and how you feel it might be either overpowered or underpowered, or just really the state of the game in general. And if you feel bad for playing it, then, you will have come to that conclusion on your own. And if not, then if you're having fun, ultimately, that's kind of the main point, is have fun. And, I don't want to say it's your responsibility to, that's up to the developers. If the developers are making something and you're not having fun, then express that to the developers, and the onus is on them. If they don't make it fun for everyone, then you can go play another game. And I don't want to tell people not to play World of Warships, but this is what the responsibility is of the devs. And right now they're trying to work through this and trying to, make the game fun for, a class of players who have never had a lot of fun with it. You had a very small select group of people who've really been enjoying the RTS style of carriers, and now we have, a change that hopefully brings more people into it.
So even though I was making a joke earlier, I was basically going through these 7 stages of grief. I do think that you basically have to just learn to accept it. When other people get mad at you, just because you're playing a CV, especially if you're not, when I'm playing anyway, when I'm not really invested in something, then I don't really care when other people get mad. And I usually just find it funny when they get really angry and send me angry messages, because it's really not that big of a deal. And I think that's something you'll have to learn to do if you play CVs, particularly on the NA server, I believe, because I think people interact more often there and they'll probably get mad more often there. So just try to see the humor in somebody just getting mad at you for playing the game, and I think you'll probably have fun.
That's definitely good advice as well. Well, thank you guys all for coming today, especially you strangers. Did you guys have any announcements or final thoughts?
Nope.
Alrighty. Well, that's it for this week, folks. We have don't forget, we have a new spot on the NA forums just for World of the Warships Podcast. Be sure to check that out for news and posts, as well as a area to ask questions of the podcast for the question of the week. Check for the link in the description. As always, follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Warships Podcast and Twitter at Warships Podcast for updates between episodes. Don't forget to check out Arun on YouTube and Twitch as well. We, of course, want to thank our amazing Patreon backers. If you're interested in supporting us, please consider becoming a backer yourself. Backers are what make the podcast possible, and we absolutely could not make this podcast without you guys. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you next week.